On today's show, we sit down with Lennox Cornwall, and we're talking about failure and why we should embrace it.
Welcome to another episode of the Baseball Awakening Podcast, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered, unsexy side of player development. Get ready for some knowledge bombs with your host, Geoff Rottmayer.
Welcome to the Baseball Awakening Podcast. I'm Geoff Rottmayer. Today, I'm sitting down with Lennox Cornwall, author of the book Embracing Failure. So we're going to talk a little bit today about failure and why we should embrace it. So Lennox, how are you, sir?
Fantastic, Geoff. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Lennox. You know, Lennox, you wrote a book called Embracing Failure. And this is a conversation that I have with all of our kids all the time. The concept of embracing failure. So I know the book was written out and maybe for business owners, but there are a lot of great points in this book and great points that I think you can bring to us for baseball players. So let's just kind of start with your background and how you got into writing this book about embracing failure.
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to. And, you know, let me just say, I'm not a baseball expert by any means. I'm a soccer guy. You can probably tell from my accent that I call soccer football. I grew up in England, and I still support my local team, Arsenal. But one thing I do know is that the guy who's regarded as the most successful baseball player of all time, Babe Ruth, was also the most, had the most failures because he kept on doing what he needed to do to get those successes. So for me, my background started out, if I can go back to my university days, I studied economics, so I'm a graduate of economics, and then I went straight into corporate banking. But after that, I wanted to fulfill a dream. I said to myself when I was a child that I'd have my own business before age 30. So I was 29, and there were some things going on in the bank that I didn't like, so I decided to resign my position at the bank and start my own business. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do, Geoff. And then I said to one of my clients, who became a really good friend of mine in the banking world, "Hey, Philip, I've resigned. I don't know what I'm going to do, but, you know, whatever." To cut a long story short, we ended up starting a business with another guy. And initially, we were really successful. We were on TV programs in England. We were on the radio, giving advice and so on and so forth. It was a consultancy practice, and we helped clients improve their businesses and their lives. And initially, like I said, Geoff, it was really successful, and then we failed miserably. I lost everything. And it was really the first thing that I failed at, and I really couldn't understand why I failed. So I just started journaling. I started journaling to understand what went wrong and how I would do things differently the next time to never be in that position again. Well, one day, like a kind of lightning bolt out of heaven, I realized in a flash that this was not just a journal. It had to be information that I shared with other people. And it was quick. I was quick to understand that the best way of doing that was to simply morph the journal into a book. So that's what I did. I started writing the book, Embracing Failure, Your Key to Success. And I struggled with kind of getting the right title. And then I kind of looked at my own failure, and I realized that failure is no more or less than a fruitful and informative lesson urging renewed effort. And those, of course, are the letters that make up the word failure. So it's an acronym for failure. And once I got that, the rest was really easy to write. I hope that answers the question for you.
Nice. And journaling is something that I love, and I'm all for it. So can you kind of share with our listeners, you know, what is the idea behind journaling in terms of what were you hoping to accomplish when you started that?
I'm going to give you two answers to that. One is my thought process back then and my thought process today about journaling, because it has changed a bit. Back then, I was simply writing down notes of what went wrong, how I could change it. So how do I feel today versus how I felt the day before? And then I'd do that the next day. So I just kept on writing things down about how I felt about this awful situation I was in, and hoping that something would pop out like an aha. Oh, that's where you went wrong. Don't do that again, and everything's going to be great. But life is not necessarily always that simple. So it really was just, if you like, a journal of things that I believed I did wrong that I could put right in the future when I was to do my next business, because I knew that I had to go back into business. I couldn't work for anybody else at that point in my life.
Right.
Now, today, I think that journaling is an awesome tool for that purpose that I used it for back then. But I also believe that journaling today is a tool that we can use to kind of tap into our subconscious minds. And I was doing that back then. I just didn't realize it. I just understand a lot more about journaling today, having done it for such a long while, and also read what some other great people have said about journaling. So journaling to me is something that if we have the discipline to do every day, it can definitely propel us into areas of our lives in terms of success in any area that we wouldn't necessarily be able to achieve otherwise. I really believe that strongly about it.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. You know, the things that we do is developed through habits that we develop. So what would be some habit that prevents us from succeeding?
I could easily go into habits that are obvious, like drinking too much alcohol, taking illicit drugs, not getting out of bed in the morning. These are obvious ones, right? And they are obviously ones that will trip us up. But I say they're obvious because we all know that. The ones that I like to talk to my coaching clients about, for example, are ones that sneak up on you. They're ones that we don't necessarily realize we're doing. So a habit is doing something in the way that we've always done it automatically. And that could simply be a way of thinking, right? Now, I say simply, but really that's the wrong word, because the way we think is so powerful that it holds us trapped in either a good place or a bad place. So let me just give you an example that I hope is relatively straightforward and simple. Now, when we greet somebody, we use certain words, good morning and all that sort of stuff. We also say the same thing when we're saying goodbye to somebody. And one of the things that many people say on an automatic basis is take care. Hey, nice to speak to you. See you tomorrow. Take care. Now, why do we use the word take care? Do we realize that we're programming ourselves to be too cautious, perhaps? Whereas what we should be saying is be great or something like that. But it's so ingrained in us that we say take care, and we're not realizing not only are we programming ourselves to be careful, but we're programming other people to do the same thing. Now, am I saying that there is something wrong with being careful? Absolutely not. If we're being careful at the expense of taking risks that are analyzed risks, weighed risks that are taking us to the next level, then yes, there's absolutely everything wrong with taking care, because taking care does not get you to the place you want to be. You've got to take risks. And listen, if you're a baseball player and you're not taking risks, you're not going to win. It's as simple as that.
Right. And so Lennox, when it comes to the baseball culture, when it comes to baseball in general, the game it's basically commonly known and referred to as the game of failure. So when it comes to the baseball world, we've gotten to a place where the goal has been to kind of shield kids from failure. So can you talk a little bit about why failure is important and why we should embrace it?
Yeah, so failure is, I like to think, the flip side of success. So if I gave you a coin, and let's just say, Geoff, that you only like heads. You don't like tails, right? So I say, Geoff, I've got this coin. It's actually quite valuable, but it's got heads and tails. I don't want it because there's the tails on it, right? Then I can't give you the coin. I can't get rid of the tails. So success and failure are like that coin. They come together. You cannot succeed without failing. It's as simple as that. And again, I'm going to use another sporting example, not a non-baseball one, to kind of drive the point home to my baseball audience here, right?
Yep.
So who is the greatest tennis player of all time, in your opinion? I don't know if it's a sport you follow.
Ooh, I don't really know tennis, so let me just go with Andre Agassi.
Right, great player, right? And I agree with you. I think if he's not number one, he's certainly the number two, in my opinion.
Sure.
And I grew up in an area where we had, Bjorn Borg and people like that who were brilliant. So now he's got a great backhand and also a great forehand. Do you think he kind of just fell out of his mother's womb and had this great backhand and great forehand? Absolutely not. He had to practice it to a point where he's now brilliant at it, both of them, forehand and backhand. he still sometimes fails at both, right? But he knows that to perfect the skill, he had to fail his way to success. And still today, if he wants to win a match, a game, or a point, there will be circumstances in which that backhand fails him or that forehand fails him, but he's not going to stop and say, oh my goodness, I'm giving up this game because I can't even get this right after all these years. The greatest salespeople on the planet, they understand that the next no they receive is going to be taking them closer to the next yes that they get. So it absolutely is part of the process. Failure is part of the process of success. Now, let me give you one other idea to kind of drive the point home. Let's say that you are driving and you come to a crossroads. Now, if we imagine that you see a sign and it says failure and success. So failure is one way. Let's just say that the sign says failure is to the left and success is to the right. Well, that would be a lie. If you turned left, you wouldn't go towards failure. You'd go towards a dead end. To get to success, you have to go through failure. So a true sign would say something like failure to the right, 20 miles, success to the right, 40 miles. You've got to go through the town of failure to get to the city of success. And that's what people don't understand. They think that, if I failed, I've made a wrong turn. No, you've made the right turn. You just have to continue going. It's only when you stop that you fail because you're stuck in that failure. But to get beyond it, you have to continue going, whether you're driving, working, walking, or whatever. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, and I agree. It's a tough concept for people and kids to really understand. But what I've seen, but when they start to understand it and really start to embrace it, that's how they get their process. And like you said, journaling it's huge, and there's lessons to be learned. But you have to reflect and pay attention.
Indeed, I agree.
Yeah, so why should we embrace it?
Well, we have to embrace it because it's the only answer. If you want to succeed, you have to embrace it. It's not a question of should I or shouldn't I. Like I said, if we take that metaphor of the town of failure and the city of success, you have to go through it if you want to get to the other side. The result of not embracing it is to accept defeat. And I would challenge anybody to listen to a great coach in whatever sport it is. Listen to a great coach after a defeat and just really take in what that coach says. He or she will be saying things like, we're going to learn from this. There are things that we saw in the game that we know we've got to put right. There are things we know that we should have done that we failed to do, and we're going to put those things right. They're not saying, oh, my goodness, we didn't do those things, so we're so bad, we need to go and find something else to do. No, we've got to put it right. So they're embracing it. They have to embrace that failure in order to go on to success. Right. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And I just wanted the people who are listening to understand that, we need to embrace it. So Lennox, a lot of people and kids are their worst enemy. They get in their own way. Why do you think that is?
I think we've been conditioned to expect perfection.
Yeah.
And, when we do something that's not perfect, we think that we've done something wrong. And I'll give you some reasons why that is. I don't know about you. I grew up in England and I went to school in England and I had a pretty successful, education career. But I had teachers who would crack my knuckles with a ruler when I got an answer wrong. Okay. So right from a very young age, I was conditioned to never get anything wrong, to never fail. I had to get it right. Otherwise there was a punishment.
Right.
That's one example. Another example is that we see, whether it's sporting personalities, movie stars, corporate executives, business owners, we see these people and we see their successes. And it's only when we start reading their autobiographies or biographies about them or listening to what they have to say in a magazine that we understand that there were struggles that went along with it. So unless you're actually going behind the scenes, all you're seeing is this person gleaming on the TV, right, and earning all this money. Because at the end of the day, we tend to boil it down to this guy or this girl has got all this money and they're a superstar. We don't really necessarily look beyond that to other values, okay? So we're programmed from a young age in school, we're programmed as well by our parents to be successful and to not fail. And we're programmed by misleading images on TV that says that this person just turned up and was a success without going through any trauma. None of that is true. None of it. So to change that around, we have to, number one, understand that we've been programmed in this way, and two, just make a decision that that's not going to affect who I become, and realize that to become who I truly want to become, I have to go through the process of failing to succeed and embrace it.
I agree. So for my listeners, we see coaches every week and every weekend have such a short leash with these kids when they're playing through through a time where they should be going through the process of learning. And so you got to be patient with them and let them go through their own trial and error, their own journey. At my training facility, my academy, we have different phases. And the first phase is always the toughest one because there's a lot of failure built into it. So that we're trying to get them to embrace the failure. So coaches and parents that are listening, there are lessons to be learned through the failure. And the lessons are so valuable. So I know it's hard, but just let them go and let them fall.
Absolutely. Failure is about learning. That's why, fruitful and informative lesson urging renewed effort is a powerful, powerful way of looking at failure. When you start looking at it as a lesson, you completely turn around what failure is. It's no longer, woe is me. It's, oh, my goodness, thank you for that. Now I can do something about it. It empowers you rather than, the way we look at failure. Typically in society, it's very disempowering. Oh, I failed, and look at so-and-so. No, look at you and look at the failure. What can I learn from it? Journal if you need to. And if you think you don't need to, that's fine, so long as you're actually learning and then applying the lesson in the next moment. Learning is one thing, but if you're not applying the lessons, right, you won't improve.
So whenever someone goes through a hard failure, if you will, a lot of times they make people and kids not want to do something again, in fear of more and constant failure. Is fear an appropriate response?
Yes and no. I would say that there is a process of grieving, okay? You've just lost something. It's not a human being necessarily, but you've lost something. When we pour our heart and soul into a particular business or a career or a sport that we love and it goes wrong, that doesn't feel good, so there's a grieving process, okay? Now, fear has described as false evidence appearing real. So if we see it in that way, if we're feeling fear and we actually dissect it as false evidence appearing real, then we can again turn that around, go through the grieving process and turn it around. Now, why do we say that it's false evidence? Well, if you think about fear is looking into the future. If you were to be present right now, there's nothing to be afraid of. You are where you are and things are okay. But if once you go 3 seconds into the future of what might happen, fear can arise, okay? So it's false evidence because it doesn't exist. The future does not exist, only now exists. So once you've actually gone through that grieving process, you can start looking at turning things around. Now, how do you do that? Well, you've got to truly understand why you want to do something. If your why about whether you want to, perfect your skills at a particular sport to be great at it, or do the same thing in business or any other arena, if you don't really understand your why, if it's not strong enough, anything can take you off course. Anything will take you off course, somebody else or your own doubts. So I would say that the first thing to turn around a failure and overcome the fear is to have a strong value system around the why you want to do something. So if I look at myself, to give people a more concrete example, why do I write? Why do I want to write another book and another one and another one? It's very simple. I have a mission. And my mission is to raise the conscious awareness of millions of people around the world through writing and coaching. So when I have any doubts about whether a book or a sentence or a paragraph is not where I want it to be, I will feel, oh my goodness, I'm not good enough maybe sometimes. But it's easy for me to turn that around because I honestly believe that this is a mission that I'm on, and it's a mission that I've been given. I truly understand what my contribution is to the rest of the planet. And when I look at it in those global terms, the responsibility is no longer on me. If I can say it's God's responsibility, that's how I see it. And all I have to do is start walking and putting the pen on the paper and start writing. And however it turns out, I've got to be, I'll do my best to make it brilliant. I always will. However it turns out, if that's my best work, I'm satisfied with it. So the pressure is no longer on me because I know what my why is. I have my mission. That's my why. And I will always strive to turn out my best work. And then the rest is up to the public, whether they like it or hate it. I cannot influence that necessarily once it's out there, and I'm okay with it.
Nice. I like that because that's something that I personally struggle with from time to time, trying to be perfect, and a lot of people don't get things done because they're trying to be perfect. So I like that.
Right. So if we look at, computers are a really great example. If we look at the first personal computers back in the day and we compare them with what we've got now, you would say that they were extremely imperfect. Right. Extremely imperfect.
Right.
Compared to today. But for the time, they were perfect, if you like, because it was not just that it was something new, it fulfilled a function. And my book doesn't have to be the best book out there. It doesn't even have to be the best book that I can write. If I put what I can into it, and at that time, based on the circumstances in my life, it is what I produce, and it's the best I can produce, then it's perfect. It's perfect in its imperfection.
Yeah, right. I love that perspective, and you're right. I hadn't really kind of thought of it that way, but you're right. So Lennox, let me ask you. In human nature, we are really good at remembering the things that we do wrong. And if you ask a kid, which I do frequently, if you ask them to write down 15 things that they did well today, a lot of them are really gonna struggle with that. Why do you think that is?
Again, I think it's down to societal conditioning. I truly do. For example, if you're in a work environment, whether you like it or not, you tend to be competing against other people, right?
Right.
We shouldn't necessarily look at it in that way. We should look at it as competing against ourselves.
Right.
But let's say that, there's 5 of you at, I don't know, you're senior VPs, and then the next position is VP of that division. Let's say it's the VP of sales, right? But there's 5 of you for the one position. You want that position, so you can kind of competing against each other. So every time we fail, that's the thing that's on our minds, right? Because guess what? All of a sudden now, our chances of getting where we want to, we perceive as being less. And that's also how the corporation may treat things. So if you're working for a corporation that values not making mistakes more than it does making advancements, you could have a bit of a challenge in that environment. So if I'm trying to give you a concrete example here. So we have organizations now like Microsoft, like Apple, like Google, who truly expect their employees to be really creative, and they allow them to be creative and make mistakes because they realize that without that creativity, the rapid rate at which technology is changing, they're going to be left behind, right?
Right.
And then you've got some older types of corporation. I won't necessarily mention any. I've done so in the past. Maybe I shouldn't.
Sure.
But that are stuck in a mindset that you can't make a mistake, right? If you make a mistake, the whole force of the company comes down on you. And so if you're in that environment, what you're going to be looking at all the time is, I failed, right? I failed. And success is, you're expected to succeed, right? You're expected to succeed, whichever type of company you're in. But you focus on the bad because that's what you think is going to be dragging you down, and you're not looking at what's going to be dragging you up. So again, you've got to flip the switch. Put yourself in an environment where you're going to win. And that is in an environment where you, as an individual, accept that you have to embrace failure to win. And if you're in an environment where you're being held back because of your creativity and the inevitability of failing in that creativity, then maybe you need a different environment. If you like, every single organization that's worth its salt has a research and development department. Research and development, by definition, means you're going to be failing. So if an organization doesn't allow its individual employees to fail also, there's something dramatically wrong with that.
Yeah, and for my listeners, you said something that I want to touch on, and it's the concept of comparing. In the baseball world, showcasing has become such a huge thing, and we're constantly taking numbers and we're constantly comparing. And what happens is some kids who don't really understand who they are as players get wrapped up in comparing numbers. And they're comparing the wrong number. They're focusing on the wrong numbers that doesn't fit the type of player that they are. So, it'd be one thing if we were focusing on the right numbers, and then we can, the whole comparing thing kind of goes away, because all we're now we're just trying to compare ourselves to kids that are like them. And instead of using it to try to one up them all the time, we used it to adjust our training. So you got to fail your way into getting better.
Absolutely. Even in soccer now, I see, particularly with the blogging and social media world, we're just bringing in all of these stats now. There's a stat for absolutely everything. And I understand it. Okay. What we're trying to do is provide a common ground to compare individual performance.
Right.
However, we are called individuals because we are individual. And, Joe Schmo, the striker for Arsenal, which is the team I support, versus, John Schmo for Man United, they may, be compared with stats, but if they're very different types of player, the stats are meaningless. I mean, they're absolutely meaningless. And this is where, for me, the visual beauty of the game and understanding a particular player's movement or, whatever it may be, is far more valuable than just looking at the stats. And I get the stats, we're trying, like I said, we're trying to find a common ground, but that kind of turns something that's a beautiful art with a bit of science into a lot of science and taking away the art. And all of a sudden you've got something completely different. It's a different game all of a sudden.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on in baseball, and apparently going on with other sports, which is really kind of a shame. But anyway, let's say you are shooting for a goal, you're shooting for something that you want to accomplish, and let's say the skill sets aren't there, or the passion isn't there. Is this something in your mind? Is it ever okay to just bow out and gratefully give up?
Well, if the passion's not there, let me start with that. If the passion's not there, you then have to ask yourself, is this what I truly feel called to do? Now, I totally understand in the world we live in, few of us seem to get to do what we truly love to do. And that could be for many reasons, okay? And one of the biggest ones, people may disagree with me on this. One of the biggest ones is the courage to pursue what we truly love to do, for many reasons, some of which include, well, there's not enough money in it. What are people going to think of me? I don't think I can even do that. I can't think of a way I can do it. I can't think of a way to make this a career. So there's a bunch of fears tied into it. So if, though, you really focus on this thing, whatever it may be, and there's no passion, I would suggest that it's the wrong thing. So right away, you're trying to make a success of something you have no, emotional attachment to, it's almost impossible to
Right.
truly succeed
Right.
where that exists. So let's now say that, this truly is your passion. You're failing at it, and things are miserable. So how do you then find the resources within you to kind of continue? That again goes back to taking a step back and gaining some perspective. So the journaling will help, and also again coming back to knowing your why. Why is this important to you? Why do you feel compelled to do this? Helps. And again, let me use another example of a real person, and that would be Leonardo da Vinci. Now, da Vinci, everybody now thinks, oh my goodness, da Vinci, what a master. But when da Vinci was alive, not everybody thought that da Vinci was this great master. And there are other, significant artists of old that we can say the same thing about. And it's only after they died did their talent become, have worldwide fame, and the value of their work elevated. So you have to have reason doing what you're doing outside of financial reasons. I'm not saying that financial reasons are not important, because they are. We live in a world where we've got to eat, right?
Sure.
And we want to enjoy the world as much as we can. That takes hard money.
Right.
So, however, if all you're doing something for are dollar signs or pound signs or whatever currency you want to work with, it's going to be a struggle. I'm not saying you can't succeed, but it's going to be a struggle. And the level of enjoyment will not necessarily be there. And when times get tough, it will be more difficult to pick yourself up to find a way to turn things around.
Receive a Baseball Awakening decal by subscribing on iTunes and leaving an objective review. To claim your decals, screenshot the review and email it to Geoff@baseballawakening.com. That's GEOFF @baseballawakening.com, and we'll get that your way.
Yeah, I see this a lot with kids. They don't really have the passion for the game of baseball. They don't understand their why. Or even their why is, their mom and dad want them to be there, and the kid just happen to be pretty good. So, it's hard, the kids that don't have this, or don't have the passion, or don't understand the why, they have a hard time with the failure moments. And, these are the moments that you're supposed to be learning something, and they're not learning because they don't really want to be there. So that's why the why and the passion is important.
Yep, and I'm sure on your podcast you've probably got both kids and parents that listen to it. I would say to the parents in particular, honor what your kids want to do as a career, as a livelihood, because they've got to live with it for the rest of their lives. And it's not just about the fame and the glory; it's about them really enjoying life. And you can be. I've seen this, and I've got clients who are living joyously in trades, regular trades, but they would not be happy as baseball players. They don't want that limelight necessarily, or, they don't enjoy the sport. And what I would say to the kids, I know obviously we've got to honor our parents and respect our parents. I would never suggest that we do anything other than that. But if you feel as a child, compelled to have a serious conversation with your parents about what you truly want to do, then I would say have the courage to do so. I have a very good, not now, I've lost touch with him, but I had a very, very good friend in London. He was a top, and I always get, there's two different words. One is English, one's American English, and American English. I'm just going to say it the way I know it.
Okay.
Anesthesiologist, right?
Okay,
He numbed people before operations. And he was like one of the top ones in Europe. I mean, this guy was renowned. But he hated it. He absolutely hated it. All he wanted to do was to be preventive in his attitude towards medicine. So he wanted to literally open like a Whole Foods store and build that store where he could be nourishing people's lives and not sort of fixing them when everything went wrong. But because of the peer pressure, he was a top he was at the top of his profession, and he felt that if he were to do something like that, massive change, people would think he's crazy. The peer pressure would be too much, and then there's all this thing with his parents conditioning him to go into the medical profession. Previously, he couldn't handle it, so he never did what he loved, and he was miserable.
Wow.
He earned millions of dollars,
Right.
but he was miserable. So what is the point of that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. You know, the whole part of enjoying what you do, because we live in a world that's so fast and it's so serious all the time, you know, especially in sports. You know, we are getting so competitive so early, which is taking the fun out. So I agree, you know, I agree with that. So, Lennox, let me ask you this. We all have limitations, and understanding these limitations are important. So how do we take these limitations and turn them into wins?
I think the first thing is to understand that all limitations, well, let me take that back. Most limitations are self-imposed. Most are self-imposed.
Yeah.
And they're imposed by a mindset, okay? Assuming that you know, let's just take a team. Let's take a good baseball team. You know, you're looking at athletes, okay? Athletes. And what really makes the difference between one and another? We can say that they're born with this innate ability and everything like that. We can say that, but that's just a limitation that we mostly impose on ourselves. And there's no doubt that, you know, some people are more athletic than others. I get that.
Sure.
But if you're talking about at the elite level, or somebody that's capable of attaining an elite level as a child, then it's really about mindset. So the first thing is to recognize that most limitations are a matter of what you believe. And, you know, there's a saying that as you believe, so shall it be. And that is the truth. So if you can work on that mindset, and, you know, there are many great books out there to help you with that. There are great coaches out there to help you with mindset, to kind of turn that around. So number one, understand that limitations are definitely mostly self-imposed. Once you recognize that, you can do something about it. You know, oh, I'm limited. And then once you believe that, you're done. But once you say, you know what, I'm seeing this as a limitation, what can I do about it? That's more empowering. So you can now do something with that. So the next thing is to take action. If you don't take action, you're going to be stuck in the limitation. And like I said, that action could be finding a good coach to help you with that, you know, reading resources and so on and so forth, and then working on it. Okay. Yeah. Again, you know, work is something that we forget about sometimes. We see these, you know, elite sports personalities, and we forget that it's taken great work. I mean, again, from the soccer world, Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi are regarded as the two best players on the planet right now, maybe the two best players of all time. Now, there's, you know, Cristiano Ronaldo actually played in England for a while with Manchester United, so I know a little bit more about the stories behind his success than I do Lionel Messi. And Cristiano Ronaldo was always the first person in training and the last person to leave. And one of the things he perfected was a way of actually perfecting and executing what we call a free kick. And he did that through staying behind later than everybody else and practicing that. So he did that through hard work, not just his athletic ability. He didn't believe in the limitation. He just believed that he was going to be able to do this, and he did. And now he is unquestionably one of the best two players in the world right now.
Yeah, and the one thing that you said that I love is believing, because the one thing that I've noticed with the guys that I've interviewed on this show that played at a high level is they all had this belief level that on a different level from the norm. But with that belief, they were able to figure out what they needed to work on, what they needed to do. They were able to figure out how to ask the right questions or what book to read. And because of that, because of this belief, they knew that there were things that went into making things happen. And so that's what I found very interesting with the guys who've had success at a high level.
Yeah, it's that mindset. And the mindset is I believe. And if you can take that mindset of I believe into I know, it becomes even more powerful, because once you know, then it's simply a question of, well, okay, now I know that I'm the greatest or whatever. Now what I've got to do is find out what resource I need to take that knowing into my reality, into a reality today. And, patience as well. Sometimes we have to allow ourselves time to develop. And this is something I see with a lot of coaching clients. They believe, okay, they've hired me as a coach, and then all of a sudden life is going to be good. Right? No, there's a period between where you are now and where you need to get to, and how quickly you get there is more about what you do than what I do. My job is to allow you to see that within you is this greatness that you seek, and help you to bring it out. But you have to do some things. I'll give you some exercises. I'll give you some resources. And I'll coach you and so on, but you have to do it.
Right, absolutely. And so what about this, Lennox? The people, and I know people like this, the people that fail and fail hard, and they fail and they fail. And it seems like they make the same mistakes over and over and over, so never really learning anything. So this is why, the reflecting and learning part is important, because those learning moments are important. But why do you think, some people, it seems like they never really learn anything?
Partly it's pride, I would say, because they know best, right? Once you know best, once you think you know best or you know everything, why would you even consider changing anything, right? You can't even consider changing anything if you know everything.
Right.
And, some people are out there in the world and they don't believe in coaches, for example. I'm not saying you have to believe in coaches, but I guarantee every successful sports personality out there, from Tiger Woods to Babe Ruth, right?
Yep.
Has had a coach or three. I mean, Tiger's probably got at least two, right?
Yeah.
One for putting, one for driving, one for his mind, one for this and one for that. Yeah. It's impossible. If you know everything, you're done, right? You can't learn.
Right.
It's that idea. I think Bruce Lee once was asked to train some guy. He was already a martial artist, but he knew that Bruce Lee was the best, and he wanted to be trained by Bruce Lee. So Bruce Lee said, well, okay, come and let's train. And so he was training with this guy, and he recognized where the guy's weaknesses and so on are. And he was trying to tell the guy something, and the guy wasn't listening. So then he said, okay, let's have some tea. And the guy was holding his teacup, and Bruce Lee started pouring the tea, and it was overflowing. The guy's going, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? He said, this is like you. I can't teach you anything because you're already overflowing with what you know. He says, you need to be an empty vessel. And so to be great, you have to have people around you. There's, we talk about, the self-made person. There's no such thing. Right. There's no such thing as a self-made millionaire or a self-made business expert or a self-made sports personality. It doesn't exist. It's this romantic idea that we got from John Wayne movies and things like that. It doesn't exist.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there are people that are down on coaching, which is amazing to me. And I think it's a huge mistake, because it's so easy when you're in the middle of things to lose perspective. I own a business. I have an academy, but I have a coach. And I'm surrounded by people who are constantly helping me, giving me ideas, giving me different angles. So, that whole, looking things from a different lens, from a different angle, makes a world of a difference.
And that's what it is. It's a different perspective. It doesn't mean that the coach is a better player or business person or anything like that. I mean, I would strongly suggest that Tiger's coaches, or whichever golfer or sports person you want to take, the coach is never as good as the player.
Right.
But it's not about being as good. They're not actually. It's a different skill set. So you know, I don't know how, I'm using sports that I know a little bit more about, and baseball's not one of them. So, there's a golfer called Justin Rose. He's an Englishman.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that was holding him back was his putting. You know, he could drive the ball beautifully, very accurately, and relatively long. And then he hired a putting coach a few years ago, and that took him to be the number one player in the world. It took him to winning a major tournament, which he'd never won before. It was always a goal of his, but he's now done it because he took on a putting coach, and that putting coach cannot putt as good as Rose was putting before he started taking coaching from this guy. But the guy knew technically what needed to be done. It didn't mean that he could execute it himself, but he knew technically. And that's what a coach is about. A coach is a person that basically brings out of you your best performance. Right. It doesn't mean that the coach is as good as you. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, Lennox. So as we wrap this up, can we talk a little bit about the guy that's listening to you and saying, you know what, I'm going to give the journaling thing a try? What would be your process, your advice for them to start the journaling process?
Okay. So I would say there's two types of journaling. There are probably more than that, but I'm going to talk about two. Number one is just generally journaling. Okay. So you may want to understand during your day what you're actually doing and how you're feeling about it. And so you would journal. You would journal throughout the day, and particularly at the end of the day. So the day's done, right? Let's say it's 7 o'clock at night, and you want to just review your day. You know, oh yeah, I remember I had that meeting with Mary, and oh my goodness, it was awful. And so why was it awful? What happened in that meeting to make it awful? And again, we're not just going to leave it there. Oh, Mary said this to me, or I didn't want to do this idea that the company had. What can you do to make that experience better the next time around? Okay. So again, you're not just going to say, oh, woe is me. You're going to empower yourself to make it a better experience next time. Maybe you can communicate with Mary a little bit better, or show the company a way of doing things that will be more productive for the company and for yourself. So that's just generally kind of seeing what you've done in the day, how you felt about it, and how you can improve it next time around. If you want to be more specific about, let's say, developing skills around baseball or whatever it may be, clearly you then have to start defining things, really crystal clear. So what is it you want to do in baseball? How good do you want to be? You want to be a professional, okay. What do you need to do to become a professional? You're going to outline all of these things, okay? You're going to actually create a plan. No. And then within that plan, you're going to be journaling how things went. So every time you play a game, every time you have a practice, every time you're thinking about baseball and you're having positive thoughts about it, you're going to ask yourself, why am I so positive about this right now? When you're having negative thoughts about it, you're going to ask yourself, well, why am I having negative thoughts about it right now? And it may be, let's take the negative one. It may be that, you know what, I really hate practicing. I hate training. I hate the push-ups, whatever it may be. But again, once you understand that this is something within a sport you need to perfect or become great at, that's an area that you don't like. But that's okay. You don't have to like everything about it to become great or to really enjoy it. But if you understand it, you can then say, okay, I've got to do these push-ups. And if you're feeling, bad about it, you know why. Because you've actually looked at it, you've journaled, and you've actually come to some conclusions. And then the things that you love doing, maybe I'm going to use a really simple example, which is hopefully it's got some value to it, but you may prefer pitching compared to batting. All right. And you feel great when you're pitching, and when you have to bat, you don't feel so good about it. Again, by analyzing it through journaling, you can make some really crystal clear decisions about where you want to take the sport and how you want to take it and who you want to be within it.
I love it, and I think the ones that develop the discipline to do that will be way ahead of their peers. We got a handful of kids that at my academy that had really bought into the journaling every day, And you can see, I mean, you can tell who's doing it and who's not. You can see the plan of action. They know what they're doing. You can see where they're going. They're so focused. Yeah, and I love the concept of it and the clarity that it brings.
Yeah, something that we haven't spoken about, and I haven't really spoken much about in Embracing Failure Key to Success, but it definitely is in my next book, which is going to be coming out in February, most likely,
Nice.
is, visualizing things.
Yes.
And when you have a plan, you can visualize the outcome way more clearly than if you don't have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're confused. And somebody once said, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And it's just truth.
Right.
Confusion comes out of not knowing where you're going. So once you know where you're going and you have this crystal clear idea and make it, you can develop that crystal clear idea again every day by journaling and other things. But once you can really see it, all of a sudden it becomes real. And I don't want to start getting into, how the subconscious mind works and all the rest of it right now because we're running out of time. But these are hugely important things that the best sports people put into practice. It's as simple as that. And if you're not putting those things into practice, you probably will not become, one of the best sports people.
Yeah, well, Lennox, man, I really appreciate your time. So let's just kind of one last thing. What would be your last piece of advice?
Most people on the planet, spend their time trying to be like everybody else to create uniqueness, and that's in that statement. You can hear that that's a ridiculous thing. You cannot be unique by trying to be everybody else. So come what may, be you, be yourself, and back yourself being yourself. And if that means that the rest of the world think you're crazy, then that's absolutely fine. Some of the best minds on the planet, some of the best inventions, including airplanes and so on, have come out of people saying, you know what, that will never work, or you're crazy, or how come you're not, watching, soap operas like everybody else? Well, who cares what everybody else is doing? So long as what you're doing is legal and moral, who cares? Be you. That's it. That's my best advice of all. To thine own self be true, as it was said more eloquently than I'm putting it.
Nice. I love that. I tell our kids all the time, just do you. They hear that. They hear that all the time. Don't worry about anyone else. Just do you. Well, Lennox, sir, thank you very much for your time. It was great.
Thanks, Geoff. It's been my pleasure, and I truly hope that if one person gets something out of this and applies it, that will be all I need.
I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and thank you for listening to our conversation on the Baseball Awakening podcast.